History may appear as a cry of victory written by the winners, but it is actually a dark, covered-up secret hidden in the whispers of the losers and the oppressed. Even worse, the history shaped by the winners has imprisoned humanity in the comfortable lie of a linear timeline, convincing us that the past consisted only of primitive tribes and Stone Age tools. However, when the dust is blown off ancient scrolls, when Sumerian clay tablets are reread through the lens of modern science, and when prehistoric structures discovered around the world like Göbekli Tepe emerge, the resulting picture shatters the stereotype narratives of official history and brings us one step closer to the truth. Today, we will examine a figure at the center of this destruction. Prophet King Solomon, a character whose true reality likely dates back thousands of years to mysteries, though limited by a Jewish-controlled theological branch as a wise Jewish king. This journey will take us from extraterrestrial beings to technologies far beyond their time, and from the narratives of holy books to the secrets of ancient tablets. Welcome to Find the Truth. Before we go deep, it's not something I do often, but if you like the content, please don't forget to subscribe and like the videos. I know these are cliche words, but unfortunately, this is how YouTube presents a channel to you. Otherwise, it causes it to fade away in the background. So please don't forget to click those two buttons. Our journey begins. When King Solomon is mentioned, many people immediately think of an extraordinary figure who seems to have jumped out of a science fiction movie, ruling over jinns, the air, and even the nature of matter. But the origin of the story is actually very different and multifaceted. For example, the figure of the great prophet King Solomon, with the mysterious powers I just mentioned, only appears in Islamic culture. No other Abrahamic religion regards King Solomon as a prophet. In fact, they see him as a sinner who went astray. He is definitely not a prophet to them. He is merely a wise king who received grace from the Lord. He could not reach the rank of a prophet. A harsh approach, isn't it? Let's listen briefly to King Solomon's story from the three Abrahamic religions step by step. Let's start with the Jews, who introduced this mysterious character as their own king and were the first to record him in written history. After all, according to all religions, he went down in history as a Jewish king. But do not forget what I said at the beginning of the video. Although history is written with the victory cries of the winners, the truths are hidden in silence. According to Jewish literature, King Solomon was a great Israeli king who lived in the 10th century BC, and according to their belief, his father was David, who is also not considered a full prophet by Jews. Some might say, wait, what's happening? David appears in the Quran as a prophet given a book. How does this work? However, as I said, this is not as simple and single-layered as we think. For instance, Jewish records state that during the years King David was fleeing from Saul, he had the prophet Gad by his side, and during his reign, the prophet Nathan was with him. In fact, when David committed adultery with Bathsheba and sent her husband Uriah to his death to get him out of the way, Prophet Nathan confronted the king and told him to his face that he had gone astray. For that reason, the concept of prophethood is handled a bit differently in Judaism. From what I've researched, these people called prophets like Nathan and God are actually similar to the Sheikh al-Islam of the Ottoman Empire, just more decorated versions. They performed these duties by claiming the Lord spoke to them in their dreams. Returning to King Solomon, he is a very successful king in Jewish literature as well. However, he does not have extraordinary features as described in Islam. He is a normal human being. In fact, he becomes corrupted by political power over time. He takes 700 wives and 300 concubines for himself. What the Jews are primarily angry about here is that he took women from peoples other than the Israelites. They see this mostly as corruption. It doesn't stop there. Because Solomon was under the influence of his wives, he built pagan temples on the hills of Jerusalem in accordance with his wives' beliefs. As time passed and he became even more corrupt, he lived in pleasure in the palace while his people suffered, and he finally died in old age, full of regret, as a figure who had lost his way. In fact, in Jewish theology, God appears to Solomon twice during this corruption and warns him. However, he does not turn back from his mistake, and because of this, God says in the Torah, "Since you have gone this way, I will tear the kingdom away from you. But for the sake of your father David, I will not do it in your time, but in your son's time." In Jewish tradition, this story is not actually told to slander Solomon, David, or Abraham. According to them, even the prophet Abraham had very serious problematic issues. It explains that these people are just human beings, and that no matter how superior their positions are, If they deviate from the Lord's path, they will be punished like ordinary people. In fact, the previous warning from the Lord is reportedly told as, "The Babylonian captivity happened to us because of this corruption of Solomon." They link the event there. When we come to Islam, we see a much more different figure of Solomon. He is no longer just a wise king, but appears as a prophet king with highly science-fictional abilities. A character who rules over jinns, can manage the conditions of nature, and can even communicate with animals. Contrary to the Jewish belief, in Islam, King Solomon stands out with the title of Prophet Solomon, and, unlike what you saw earlier, he ruled without being corrupted. The Quran only highlights this point in the story. Whatever Solomon's talent was, its only source was that Allah gave him knowledge, nothing else. I emphasize this particularly because it is not in the Quran, but in Islamic culture it is told that part of Solomon's ring was made of iron and part was copper, and through this, he ruled over jinns and nature. It is told that he had special spells and amulets, that he controlled jinns with objects that bound them, and the story gets embellished. However, according to the Quran, Allah only gave knowledge to Prophet Solomon, and he was able to do these things through Allah's grace. In any case, the Quran does not convey the story in all its details. As it usually does with such topics, it gives general information and moves on. According to the Quran, Prophet Solomon was not an exalted superhuman character. To emphasize this, the book recounts that when Prophet Solomon died, he remained leaning on his staff, and the jinn's thoughts that he probably couldn't have died were shattered when the staff broke and his body fell to the ground. In short, according to the Quran, Prophet Solomon was just a human like all other prophets, and his superiority was only that Allah gave him knowledge. Apart from that, when the day came, he died naturally like all other prophets and people. As you can see, there is an abyss-like difference in narrative between the two religions. When we ask a Jew, they say, "He was our king." Islamic culture is giving incorrect information. When you ask a Muslim, they say, since they wrote everything according to their own whims, they insulted the Prophet. The correct one is the Quran's account. Now, the decision is up to your faith. Because there is a much bigger problem at hand. The fact that not even a single line of information or evidence about a character called King Solomon can be found in official historical records outside of Jewish tradition. If we set aside Jewish tradition and other Islamic sources directly or indirectly influenced by it, we are left with the conclusion that King Solomon and his extraordinary kingdom existed in the 10th century BC. However, in the records of the 21st dynasty of Egypt, the Assyrian records, the Babylonian records, and even the Phoenician records, which had a more intense connection with the region, there is not even a single commercial text about such a person and his kingdom. Let me expand on the situation. In Surah An-Naml in the Quran, various details such as the correspondence between the Queen of Sheba, Belkis, and Prophet Solomon, their meetings, and the teleportation of the throne are written. However, once again, not a single piece of academic or historical evidence for this has been found. The Kingdom of Sheba is a real kingdom, and there are thousands of historical records belonging to the 8th and 5th centuries BC. The place we call Sheba is the modern-day Yemen region, and its capital is Marib. However, there is no solid evidence for the existence of the kingdom in the 10th century BC, when the story is said to have taken place. Besides that, while there are thousands of very detailed records from the 8th and 5th centuries regarding kings, priests, offerings to gods, expeditions, and trade agreements, there is not a single record of a queen named Belkis, a king named Solomon, or key names like Jerusalem, Israel, and Judah. The first place this narrative appears in the region is in the books of the Ethiopian tradition, called Kebra Nagast, and they were written as late as 1300 AD. The sole reason for writing this was the efforts of the Ethiopian kings of the period to gain political legitimacy and divinity for themselves by using legends and saying, "Look, our lineage goes back to Solomon." Here are 3 different faces of the story. Which path you take is up to you, of course. But I want to offer a 4th alternative for those like me who love to research and walk their own path. A path where I argue that both Judaism, Islam, and academic knowledge can be melted in one pot, and that these actually tell a real story. Only a path whose time dates back thousands, maybe tens of thousands of years before we anticipate. And according to this path, a character like Prophet Solomon, who possesses extremely interesting and extraordinary abilities as described in the Quran, may have truly lived. However, not in the 10th century BC, as Jewish tradition says, but way back before the deluge. In many videos I've made before, I've explained to you how much the Jews were influenced by the works and beliefs of civilizations like Egypt and Sumer, both during the Babylonian captivity and while establishing their own religion. This behavior pattern of the Jews will actually guide us in our research today. Now, alright, according to academia, either a powerful person named King Solomon did not live, or as Israel Finkelstein said, he may have lived but was an idealized version of a simple tribal chief of his time. But if we take into account that classic mistake in Jewish tradition I just mentioned, we can ask this question, what if, just like other stories, Solomon's story is a combination of an old character or characters? What if those specific details about technological and divine knowledge in the Quran are a narrative about the lost civilizations of ancient times? Let's evaluate this possibility and start walking a new path. One of King Solomon's most important attributes is that he built the great holy temple in which the Israelites believed they communicated with God. And Solomon actually built this temple using the project he received from King David. King David, on the other hand, explains that this came to him through a divine revelation, and that he saw the nearly finished version of the draft through a kind of vision. Now, naturally, there is no historical first temple. What we see now are actually the remains of the structure known as the Second Temple, which the Jews built after the exile. And as I gave academic examples earlier, there is no finding in history regarding that great kingdom of Solomon and the massive First Temple. The general consensus is that when the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem, there was a temple there that the Israelites called the House of God. Not as large as in the legends, but a normal temple. Indeed, Babylonian conquest records do not mention a temple of such legendary size. They mention the burning of a house of worship, and more specifically, the capture of treasury rooms. I think if they had found a room and temple with the Ark of the Covenant at its heart, protected by giant cherubim, and where the Lord himself appeared, they would have recorded it. From this, I decided to break down the story and the characters layer by layer, and I prepared this video for you in that way. Now, as I said earlier, one of King Solomon's greatest attributes was building the temple that his father received through inspiration. I read that before this story entered Jewish sources in this way, it appeared similarly in ancient Sumer, and our hero in this older story is King Gudea, who ruled the city-state of Lagash between 2124 and 2144 BC, and was one of the most beloved rulers in the ancient Sumerian civilization and a symbol of the Sumerian Renaissance period. He was a deeply religious king known for his architectural achievements. For this reason, he gave himself the title Ensi, meaning representative of God, thus creating a prophet-king figure. He had hundreds of statues of himself made, which are still exhibited in the Louvre Museum today. And one of our king's greatest characteristics appears in the historical texts known as the Gudea cylinders. One day, while Gudea is sleeping, the god Ningirsu enters his dream and commands him to build a great temple for him, the structure known in history as the Eninu Temple. In fact, while giving this command, he shows the plans and the draft of the temple to Gudea on a tablet of lapis lazuli, the blue stone, and commands that even the cedar trees to be used in the construction of the temple be brought from Lebanon. Don't forget, this story is identical to the narrative of the cedar trees for the Solomon Temple being brought from the mountains of Lebanon by Master Hiram. The gold, silver, and copper for the construction of the temple are brought from distant lands. Once again, this is identical to the narrative of precious metals for the Solomon Temple coming from distant lands. But the similarities haven't ended. When Gudea finishes the house of Ningirsu, his lord, a 7-day feast is held. In the Jewish narratives, it is told that when Hiram finished the temple, King Solomon declared a 7-day holiday. Isn't the parallelism and coincidental similarity, despite the 1,200-year gap, too striking? Of course, if you believe in coincidences. Oh, by the way, unlike that giant temple that the Jews insist existed, the Eninu Temple was discovered by archaeologists in 2022 during excavations in Iraq's Dhikar Governorate. In fact, 200 ancient tablets have been found so far. This is how it looks digitally recreated after the data obtained. Truly, a massive temple complex. Let's continue our journey. Let's examine the extraordinary features identified with King Solomon that mostly appear in esoteric Jewish belief and Islam. That is, his talking to jinns, being able to go from one place to another very quickly, and various abilities based on divine knowledge that were impossible for that period. The situation here is not as simple as the relationship between the construction of the previous temple and the Sumerian king Gudea. There is a more multi-layered situation involved, so please pay attention to this part. It will be an important link for your research. We had seen in previous videos how dramatically the structure and religious culture of the Israelites changed during the Babylonian captivity and under Persian influence thereafter. For those interested, I will leave the links to all those videos at the end of the description section. You can watch them. I will talk about a king who appears as one of the sources for some people who research Israeli history, saying that if Solomon existed, he was a normal tribal chief and was later legendary. The legendary Persian king Jamshid. Jamshid, or by his older name Yima, is actually thought academically not to be a real king, because just like King Solomon, there are no records of him in official archaeology. However, he is a very important figure in Iranian mythology, and he also appears in the Avesta writings, the holy book of the Zoroastrian faith, both with extremely interesting features. I want to give this preliminary information here. The information I will mention shortly will be information that was particularly valued by the Sassanid state in the post-Persian Empire period and added to the Avesta with some symbolic motifs. And don't forget, this is the period when the Sassanids exchanged culture with the Prophet and his circle in the early periods of Islam. In Persian mythology, Jamshid is the most brilliant ruler of the Pishdadian dynasty, and his 700-year reign is considered the golden age of Iran. As detailed in Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, Jamshid is a wise king who taught humanity the making of iron weapons, silk and wool weaving, jewelry extraction, and the art of medicine. He divided society into 4 classes: priests, warriors, farmers, and artisans, and established the Nowruz festival, which symbolizes the arrival of spring. It is said that in his period, there was no sickness, old age, or death, and total prosperity prevailed. In the great Vendidad literature, which also covers the holy book Avesta, it is said that Jamshid was given a special golden seal from the divine realm, and that through this seal, his kingdom on earth was divinely legitimized, and this is the main part now. He gained authority over devas and animals thanks to this seal. If any of you ask what a deva is, devas are the beings generally known today as jinns. These devas were able to take Jamshid's flying throne anywhere instantly. They would obey his every command and do things that appeared metaphysical. At the end of the story, Jamshid gradually begins to deviate from the divine path and loses his divine aura, falling from power, because he has departed from the true path of creation, just like Solomon's departure from the Lord's path and losing his way in Jewish texts. If you consider that this story we're talking about is a myth told thousands of years before both Islam and Judaism, and that it was transmitted directly to the Israelites through the Persians and directly to Prophet Muhammad and his circle through the Sassanids, you can draw an interesting connection. However, the real interest begins after asking the question of which period Jamshid lived in. According to the legend, Jamshid ruled not in the history we know, but long before the deluge, that is, in the golden age of the first humans, meaning in the very age of the Anunnaki. Don't forget this. No matter which topic you research in the history of religions, this is the point you will eventually reach. Whether it's the Abrahamic religions, Hinduism, or the ancient religion of Egypt, it doesn't matter. When you go back step by step, this topic will always meet you, just as it meets us now. This golden age of the first humanity, in which Jamshid lived and is said to have traveled the world with his flying throne, had jinns do his work, spoke with animals, and established a wonderful kingdom with his seal, actually appears in every culture. According to Abrahamic religions, it is the pre-deluge period extending from Adam to Noah. According to Hindus, it is the Satya Yuga, when humans and gods lived together. And according to the Sumerians, it is the period after Enki created humanity and gave them divine knowledge, during which they lived together. And according to this approach, Jamshid is actually one of the first human kings in the periods when very advanced civilizations lived together with celestial beings, perhaps tens of thousands of years ago. If you recall, according to the Sumerian king list, the first of these human kings was Alulim, that is, the first human given divine knowledge. Today in Islamic culture, this person is also called the Prophet Adam. I went into the details of this subject in my Adam video. Don't forget to watch it. According to myths, a major cosmic event ended this golden age in which Jamshid lived, and the world suddenly entered a terrifying ice age. In fact, according to the epic, the god Ahura Mazda warns Yema, that is Jamshid, against the approaching terrible disaster. And Yema keeps humanity alive by putting them into specially prepared underground shelters for protection. Now, even though we have already seen the roots of the Solomon narrative here, there is one more detail we need to add, because the Jews who stole even their Lord's name from Sumerian myths probably took this too. The tablets that represent the divine knowledge of the gods, namely their technologies, and are called Emi. These tablets are instructive tablets that store advanced astronomical knowledge, seasonal cycles, mathematics, physics, and chemistry. And in myths, gods sometimes share the knowledge in these tablets with prophets they deem worthy and make them the leaders of their societies. This is where the archetype of the king, who gained legitimacy with permission from the heavens, came from. In any case, it is told that human kings ruled the old ages with wisdom thanks to these Emi tablets, or, in the Babylonian account, the tablets of destiny. And kings after the deluge also attributed these stories to their own lineages, just like the Ethiopian kings of the 14th century AD did. They did PR like, "Look, I am also a divine ruler who has been honored with God's grace." Did another Jewish character come to mind who was given tablets by God and thus guided his people? You know, a character coming with his tablets containing the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. Anyway, let's not stray from the topic. We can touch upon him another time if you wish. From what I've researched, these ME tablets containing divine knowledge were information strictly protected by the Anunnaki and shared only with a very, very limited number of people deemed worthy. In fact, according to myths, when the main protector of the tablets, the wise Enki, once stole 100 of these tablets from the goddess Inanna and escaped in his flying vehicle, he even entered into a serious struggle with her to prevent the unimaginable power she would gain. In the Sumerian belief, it was believed that mastery over the main dynamics of the universe would be established with the knowledge in these tablets, meaning these people are talking about advanced technology and scientific data according to our current perception. In fact, you frequently see this context in Anunnaki stories, in texts like the Book of Enoch and in the Torah. There is knowledge that the gods gave to humans bit by bit, and it is forbidden for you to learn beyond that, because they fear that with that knowledge we will become like them and will no longer obey them or serve them. So, Jamshid, as a wise human king, accessed this technology and knowledge to the extent the gods allowed and established dominance over elements, animals, and jinns. How much does it resemble the message, he could only do these things thanks to the knowledge Allah gave him? When the Quran talks about Prophet Solomon, in fact, remember, when the Quran talks about the wise person who brought Belkis's throne faster than even the jinns, it refers to him as the person who had knowledge from the book, and it leaves what the book in which these advanced sciences are hidden is as a mystery. Some call it Lawh al-Mahfuz, but the main point doesn't change regardless of its name. A book or ME tablet in which high knowledge from God, or according to the Sumerians, the gods, is hidden. In the part connected to pre-deluge civilizations, unfortunately, my research sources decrease significantly, because we are talking about an age that has been erased and only fragments remain. But I can only go this far into the bottom point of this subject as much as I can. If we summarize everything briefly and melt all the information in one pot, our summary of the alternative paths on the normal history, extreme history, and academic ground appears as follows. Long years pass since humans were designed by beings from the sky, and from a certain period, these creatures called Anunnaki give the management of some city-states in the world to these long-lived wise kings, and Jamshid is one of them. After the deluge disaster, the surviving humanity does not fully understand the advanced civilization and kings of this old culture, and technology acquires a divine, magical narrative. In fact, most civilizations also mistakenly begin to worship these people as gods. Years pass, and this belief becomes solidified in history as polytheistic religions. When the tribe called the Israelites is taken into captivity by the Babylonians for 80 years, they are influenced by the beliefs and narratives of these cultures and begin to incorporate these concepts into their own religion. Finally, when they are saved from captivity thanks to the Persians, they exaggerate them in their eyes, and by adding the Persians' Jamshid-style stories to their own culture, they turn certain lineages and perhaps people who never lived into legends for their own interests. And while we encounter the wise and great King Solomon according to the normal Jewish literature, the the story of the great wise prophet Solomon, who ruled over jinns just like Jamshid, was in communication with God and learned knowledge from them, emerges according to the esoteric literature. Again, if you continue on the academic path, you could say that Islamic culture, influenced by both the Jews and the Sassanids, adopted the Jamshid-like prophet Solomon story for this reason. Or, as I said in my Ashabi Kaf video, I don't like this academic historical approach. For me, what is written in the Quran is clearly true and independent of all the rest of historical science, you might say. You might say that, apart from what Jamshid and Gudea experienced, a prophet named Solomon also experienced the same things in exactly the same way in a period whose time we do not exactly know. And you would say all these were unrelated, coincidental events. Ultimately, the choice is entirely yours. I just tried to present all possible paths to you as much as I could, and I left the resources you will benefit from in the description section. I hope it has been useful for your research, no matter how you approach the events. If I had actually embellished this topic by saying things like, the metal on Solomon's face was made of an extraterrestrial metaphysical substance, and when you hold the pentagram on it at a 45-degree angle, you capture the jinns, the video would probably have been watched more without getting into any controversy. However, the narrative style in that small example, and most of the stories, are unfortunately stories put forward in the Middle Ages, which jumbled up the old esoteric information after Christianity. For that reason, I didn't want to get into those hypothetical narratives much. However, there is truly an esotericism involved. But to understand this, we need to look not at medieval fabrications, but at the remains of the old age as much as we can reach. We need to look at the symbolism in the Avesta, the Hindu Vedas, and the occult teachings of ancient Egypt, so that we can learn healthily what the main information about this subject really was. Otherwise, we will continue to sleep and be put to sleep by listening to endless stories detached from their original context. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to look at the videos I left in the description section. The channel is like a puzzle, and when you watch everything, your perspective on many things will probably change from top to bottom. See you in the next video. Take care of yourselves.